This is a story about Gambi. Gambi was a good man. Gambi was very poor, but Gambi also really didn't say very much. And Gambi lived by himself in a little cottage away from the village a bit, and he had a small field that he plowed. And so every morning, Gambi would get up and he'd use rice stalks to make shoes, and he'd sell those in the market. And in the evening, he would make raincoats out of the same rice stalks. And during the day, he would get out to his field and he would plow and care for his field because he grew rice, which he also sold to make a very, very modest living. But the one thing about Gambi was he was very lonesome. Until one night there was a knock on his door. It was a very light tap. He walked to the door and opened it, and there was a beautiful woman. And she said, "Sir, do you have anything to eat? I'm very hungry." And Gambi, a man of very few words, said, "Yes." And so she came inside, and he offered her the food that he had was modest, but it was filling, and she was so happy for it. And then, later that evening, Gambi went into his bedroom and she slept near the hearth. The next morning when she woke up, she was so taken by Gambi, who was such a kind and good person, that he said, "You're lonely and I'm lonely, and would you marry me?" And Gambi, a man of very few words, said, "Yes." Well, it changed Gambi's life. He just loved his new wife so much. And so every morning when he sat down with the rice stalks to make shoes, he continued to look at his wife while he was doing it until she finally said, "Gambi, no one can wear shoes that big." And in the evening, when he was busy with the rice stalks making capes for rain, she would say to him, "Gambi, there's nobody tall enough for the raincoats that you're making." But where it really got to be a problem was when Gambi went out to the field to plow his field, and he would look at his wife sitting on the porch of the cottage and smile, and then he would team his horses together and he would begin to plow. And by the time he got to the other end of the field, he was so lonesome for his wife that he left his horse and his plow there, ran all the way back the field just so that he could see her up close again. Well, his wife said to him, "Gambi, you can't keep doing this because the plows are not getting the field done. You've got to get those taken care of." She said, "I have an idea." She said, "I've saved a few coppers, and I'm going to go into town and have an artist draw a picture of me. And then I will bring that picture back, and we will put it on the far end of the field in a tree where you can see it. And so when you leave in the morning and you look at me and you then plow to the end of the field, you'll see my picture. And you won't have to run back to see me. You can continue plowing." Well, it really, really worked out well. But of course, like all good things, there's always something that happens. And in this particular case, there was a very, very windy day. And the wind finally blew the picture from the top of the tree and blew it away. And the picture kept floating in the breeze until it went over the barrier wall of the local lord. And the Lord's Savior, one of his servants, came into him and showed him this picture. And the Lord grasped it immediately and said, "This is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I must have her for my wife." Now, his servants were all kind people, and they really didn't want to do what the Lord had asked them to do, but they were just servants. And so they took the picture itself, and they went around to the various villages asking people if they knew who this beautiful woman was. Finally, they came upon someone who said, "Why, that's Gombi's wife." "Gombi? That's right, Gombi. He lives outside the village in that small cottage down the road." Well, immediately the servants went back and told the Lord they'd identified this beautiful woman. And the Lord said, "You must go and fetch her and bring her back to me right now." Well, the servants didn't want to do it, but they finally did because it was demanded of them. And they came to the little cottage and they knocked on the door, and the door opened, and there was Gombi's beautiful wife. And they said to her, "We must take you to the Lord. He has insisted that he see you immediately." Well, the beautiful woman looked at them and he said, "I must spend a bit of time with my husband Gombi." And the servants, being as kind as they were, stood outside and said, "Of course, madam." And so Gombi by this time was terribly upset. He didn't want to lose his beautiful wife. She said, "Gombi, don't worry. We can't not obey what the Lord has asked. However, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out into the woods and find a small pine tree. And then about 2 weeks from now, when we're in the midst of the Christmas holidays, I want you to put that pine tree in a burlap bag. And then I want you to take off your regular clothes and find the raggiest old clothes that you possibly can find and put those on. And you come into the village, and all you have to say is, 'Pine trees for sale.'" Well, Gombi looked at her and said, "Pine trees for sale?" She said, "Yes, that's exactly what you have to do." Well, by that time, the servants were knocking on the door again, and so Gombi's wife collected what few belongings she had, and she accompanied them to the Lord's manor. And when she got inside the manor, the Lord rushed out and took one look at her and said, "You are the most beautiful person I have ever seen, and I want you to be my wife." Well, she just stared at him, and he said, "Why are you not smiling? It's such a privilege to be my wife." And she continued to look at him without smiling. And he said, "That will never do. I cannot marry you until you are happy and you are smiling." And so over the next week, he kept bringing her special gifts to make her smile, and she didn't. And then he would bring in minstrels and clowns to entertain her, and she didn't smile. And he brought in beautiful platters of food and fruit and vegetables, and she didn't smile. And the Lord was beside himself. What can I do to make her smile? And Christmas came, and then there was a very, very slight voice that coming to the manor, "Pine trees for sale." And this beautiful woman cracked a very, very light smile. And the Lord said, "You're smiling, but I need more." And as the voice got closer, "Pine trees for sale," the Lord took this woman and himself out to the window, looked down the vale to where there was a beggar carrying a pine tree and yelling, "Pine trees for sale." And as he got closer, the beautiful woman began to smile more. And the Lord said, "Oh, that's it, but I need more than just a smile." And as the man got right next to the manor and looked up at the two of them and began to say, "Pine trees for sale," the Lord was amazed because this beautiful woman began to smile even more. But he said, that's not enough. And so he asked his servants to go and get the man and bring him up the stairs to the main room where they stood. And as he did, the man, who was really Gambi, said, pine trees for sale. And the Lord watched the wife, and she's smiling more, but she wasn't laughing. And he said, well, perhaps if I do this. And he ordered Gambi to take off his rags, and he gave Gambi his own beautiful ermine and fur coat to put on, and the Lord put on the rags that Gambi had been wearing. And he took the tree out of the Gambi's hands, and he held it up, and he said, pine trees for sale. And the beautiful woman smiled more proudly. But he said, can you laugh, if you just will laugh for me? And she pointed to the basket with the pine tree, and she pointed outside and gestured to him to go outside. And the Lord did, because he was so eager for her to laugh. And he went outside, and the servants closed the door to the manor. And the Lord began saying out loud, pine trees for sale, pine trees for sale. And Gambi's wife laughed and laughed. And the Lord was so pleased until he realized, as he looked up at the window, that the beautiful woman and Gambi, in the Lord's beautiful coat, were looking out at him from the manor. And the door to the manor was closed and locked. And the Lord stood there in rags with a pine tree. And he realized that he had been tricked. And he looked up at Gambi and Gambi's wife, who looked so happy, and they looked rich with all of the finery they were wearing, and they stayed in the manor and lived happily ever after.